Well, welcome everyone. My name's Mary Pilotte. I'm the Director of Undergraduate Programs at Purdue University, which includes multidisciplinary engineering, and I'm an engineering professor of practice and associate professor.
And I guess that means that's my cue to introduce myself. Hello, everybody. I'm Rich Dionne. I am an associate professor of practice in the Department of Theater here at Purdue University, and with my colleague Mary, one of the co-directors of the Fusion Studio for Entertainment and Engineering.
So we're super excited to have everyone here today and really launching our first Fridays at the Fusion Studio with perfecting your proposal, turning an idea into an abstract. And so we're grateful that you would spend this time with us. We want this to be an interactive event. We'll start with some content, and about midway through, we're going to open it up for all of you to participate, hopefully wildly and enthusiastically. Rich?
Sorry, I'm managing folks at admitting them to the room. Are you ready for me to move to the next slide?
I am. Next slide, please. So this is today's agenda, and I thought I would use something called the backwards design framework to explain how we set up today's agenda. Backwards design is something that was developed by authors Wiggins and Mateague, and we use it in engineering education to think about how we design curricula. And so in this particular case, we begin with the end in mind. So what is it that we want people to be able to know, understand, and do? And then we think about what is the content that we need to provide so that folks can create the artifacts that are required to demonstrate that they know what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And then finally, what we do is we provide the toolkit for folks to be able to use those tools to create the artifacts that hopefully aim for the end target that we're shooting for. And so we've set up today's agenda using that framework, where first we're going to start with the end in mind and talk to you about an opportunity, and then we'll roll into the content that is really around the proposal material, and then we're going to provide some tools for you. Rich?
Before we move on to the next slide, we sort of wanted to let everybody know that certainly ask questions. We hope that the slide portion of this will only be about 15 or so minutes at the beginning, and then leave a robust half hour or so for us to talk about your ideas. And we're sort of assuming that you came to this with thoughts of things that you might want to share at our symposium or some other conference. We want to leave time to be able to brainstorm together about that. So certainly feel free to ask questions, but please know that we're going to try to push forward to leave time to talk together as a group as well. Are you ready for the next slide, Mary?
I am.
Fantastic.
And so the next slide really just provides us, if you want to click on through those, Rich, provides us with the signpost that you'll see in this particular document. We'll make this document available to anyone who wants it. And so you'll see the little signpost of the end, the info, and the tools, so you can navigate this slide deck later or share it with others so that they can navigate it. Next slide, Rich.
That's my cue. I got to pay attention to my script and pick up my cues. So the end that we are heading for, again, we're being very self-serving here a little bit and making the assumption that you all are supremely interested in making a proposal for our third annual symposium on education in entertainment and engineering. And we wanted to make sure that you knew that that will happen in July of 2021 here at Purdue University. We are crossing our fingers and holding out hope that we'll be at a place where we could do that live and in person, but we are absolutely planning for the reality of a hybrid remote live event or even a fully remote event in the same way that we did this year.
But I'll also say that the content is not necessarily specific, except at the very back where we share with you how to submit the material should you want to join the symposium. So hopefully it will be beneficial to you no matter what abstract you're trying to present.
Absolutely. To that end, for the symposium, we offer three kind of tracks or opportunities for participation. And the first is a presentation of a traditional academic paper. The second is either you would form or would indicate that you are interested in being part of a panel discussion of some kind. And the third is a poster session. And that's new for us this year. We are trying to encourage students in particular to participate in a poster session of their work as an entree into this kind of an event. And it's worth noting that we are discipline agnostic to a certain degree. This is a group, a community that we're building that is comprised of engineers who are practitioners, engineers who are educators, live entertainment practitioners and live entertainment educators, as well as graduate and undergraduate students. And so we are making every attempt to make this event open to any of those demographics and groups of people. Later, a little foreshadowing, because I love to foreshadow, we're going to talk about the fact that this brings together a number of folks from wildly different academic cultures and backgrounds. And the ways in which knowledge is shared and disseminated in those different academic cultures, particularly engineering and entertainment, are very, very different. And we have discovered over 2 years that that can sometimes become a barrier to communication and understanding. And so part of our goal today is to help provide some frameworks to help build language for presentations, papers, and abstracts that can help make sure that folks from these very different backgrounds can understand and have access to each other's work.
So there's some very basic information that you would need if you're preparing a proposal. The obvious things like who the authors are, if you're doing a panel, who the moderators and participants might be, the mode of presentation, obviously your abstract, and it's usual for you to have to provide some sort of bio and photo. In our particular symposium, we actually create a booklet and that's archived at the Purdue ePub site. And so you can imagine that your work will be published somewhere. In our particular case, we publish it, but we don't hold on to exclusive rights. So you have an opportunity to publish the work and then republish it in other venues. So you could think about work in our symposium as kind of a test field. So you could see how people respond to your work. What we're going to talk about over the next couple slides are really focusing in on the modality of how you want to present your work. So in what sort of presentation choice. And so Rich mentioned we have 3 different options: papers, panels, and posters. And to begin with papers, papers can include anything from a work in process or work in progress to a full work, scholarly work that you have. And as I mentioned a moment ago, if you present in our symposium, if you submit an abstract and work in our symposium, you're still allowed to submit that into other works. The second choice is a panel. And we strongly encourage to submit participants who are interested to submit abstracts for panels. It's an opportunity really for open discussion, to bring in subject matter experts to talk about trends in industry or in practice or in scholarly academic sort of settings, how you're teaching, how students are learning the content that you're presenting. It's always also another opportunity to talk about maybe some of the problems that everyone are experiencing. So you could think about what are the overarching themes or community discussions that you wanted to have, and that would be a great opportunity for a panel. Finally, is the poster. And posters are always convenient for graduate students because graduate students always have a poster ready to go. Again, it's a good place to share preliminary data and collect feedback from experts in the field and people within the community. It's also a lighter writing load. Let's be honest, we're all, well, maybe I shouldn't project that onto you, but I'm a little overwhelmed in the COVID world and having to adapt to everything that's around us. So if you're looking for something maybe a little lighter load, um, presenting an abstract for a poster might be right for you. So kind of jumping into the meat of an abstract, I've provided a couple examples here. One is really what sort of information is provided in an abstract. What does it look like in an APA format, which is a nice consistent format to follow. Some have Chicago style, but we use APA. And then an actual physical artifact of an abstract. This wasn't from our conference, but it was a nice example that I thought provided the various elements. So for our abstracts in the symposium, abstracts are required for papers, panels, and posters. They can be 150 words to a max of 500. Really, 150 tends to be a nice half page to 1/3 page. 500, and you start getting a little long. So to the left of the slide, you can see some of the basics of creating an abstract if you've never done one before. And then in this example, you can see that the key components are what's the problem or the opportunity that your work really begins to uncover. In terms of participants, what you need to talk about, what's the study about and who's involved in really helping uncover your work or demonstrate your work. Then you move into the methods section. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, but this should have some sort of framework or approach that you're using. It's going to talk more about the type of data that you might have used, if whether that's qualitative or quantitative. And then, of course, you're going to talk about the so what, the findings, what came out of your work, and why should the community care about your work. And that's all in that brief 150 to 500 words.
So I alluded to this earlier, again, foreshadowing. It's one of my favorite things. I do this in every presentation. But if we were in person together, this would be the moment where I would say, by a show of hands, how many of you have ever submitted an abstract for an academic journal or conference before? A sort of a true formal abstract. And I would bet that probably about half of you. And I would bet that if we were to really start to dig into the details of that, I would imagine that my colleagues who come from entertainment and theater as an academic discipline do that far less often than our colleagues who are in engineering or science or related disciplines. That's broadly stereotypical statement for me to make that I can't support by you all showing your hands, but I'm going to make it anyway and trust that you'll forgive me if I'm grossly incorrect. But that is generally speaking, a truth of the two very different academic disciplines. And that is reflected in the work that we've seen in the symposium the last 2 years, and is really sort of the impetus for this conversation. So as Mary has pointed out, there is a framework and a culture of a particular way of presenting information around a research study that informs how an engineering abstract is written. And as she said, that there is generally a moment where you identify what a problem is, and then you have a hypothesis for how you're going to address that problem. That forms the thesis statement of your abstract and your presentation. Then you identify how you're going to test that. And if anybody remembers their like 9th grade natural science class, this is all about the good old-fashioned scientific method. This is the thing I'm going to address and try to find information about. This is how I'm going to do it, and this is how I'm going to prove what I figured out. Those are the methods. More complex research studies, you'll talk about who the participants are often. And then you'll have a discussion of, okay, well, this is how the methods I use to gather information about my test, and this is what I discovered. These are the findings. And what's fascinating about that, if you're not familiar with that format, is that you don't talk about what those findings mean at all in this section. You just the facts, ma'am, from Dragnet, if you remember. This is what I found. I did this test and this was the result. And I did this test and this was the result. And then there is a concluding section where you draw, you sort of tease out the ramifications of that those findings and often point out where there's room for more research to be done or more tests. That is the classic sort of science/engineering abstract format. And we see many of those, many proposals in that format. There is not really a universally accepted format for designed things like technical designs for a particular production problem, or there is increasingly a format for an increasingly used format for instructional design cases, and it actually works really well for design of other kinds of things as well. So for my colleagues who are from theater or entertainment who don't have and aren't familiar with the sort of engineering framework, this is a framework that you might be able to use, and we encourage you to think about using for proposals related to, say, instructional design or curriculum design, courses and whole curriculum or curricula, and also, again, things related to specific production or live entertainment or themed entertainment problems that you want to talk about. Like, this was a thing that we needed to solve, and this is how we solved it. So this is a good format for that. And it is similar in many ways to the typical engineering format, but it has some deviations. So in the abstract, we would expect to see a discussion of the design opportunity. So we were producing a production of Cabaret, and we needed an elevator, and that elevator needed to travel 6 feet. There you go. That is your design opportunity. You could similarly do that for instructional design problem. The context then is a description of the situation within which the design was created. So this might be more information about the budgetary constraints, the length of time of the production, whether it was at a LORT theater or an academic institution, et cetera, those kinds of things. What is the context within which this design had to be created? And similarly, that could mean in a small liberal arts college at a one faculty member theater department in Maine, for example, right? The context that you're working within which. It will include a description of the design itself, what the final design was, and then again, a description of the methods used to assess the efficacy of that design. And that can be purely qualitative. I was joking with Mary about this earlier. And then we had a standing ovation every night. Probably not the most effective use of quantitative methods, but so it can be more qualitative and less quantitative, more about the response to it and less about numerical facts. And then once again, a discussion of those facts, those findings, or qualitative assessments, and then a conclusion. So again, similar, but a slightly different framework. Where it gets wildly divergent from the engineering form is the actual paper itself. And I sort of would give out some information about that, or the actual presentation, which would include a very robust and rich description of the process of creating the design, including all of the tensions and challenges and opportunities that informed features in the final design. So for example, you have an elevator again, and you have in stock a 5-horse motor and a drive controller from a particular venue or manufacturer. That's going to drive the design in a particular way because you're going to use that instead of building something new, for example. So that is the very quick overview of the design case format for abstracts. I think, I lost control of my PowerPoint. Yes, Mary, to you.
So this is really where we open the floor up. We've already talked more than we wanted to before you all get to participate. We want to find out what sorts of ideas you're working on, some topics that you think you want to uncover, and then maybe we could just, chat about those broadly and help you think about them, whether they're industry-based or, if you're a practitioner, by all means, again, as Rich mentioned earlier, you should be participating in these sorts of venues that, we know there's lots of innovation going on, and if we can help you bring those ideas to an abstract for a presentation, whether that's a panel or a poster, that would be great. And of course, our friends in education who are looking for outlets to share their work. So this is where we open it all up. Hopefully you can let us see you, or you can unmute your mics and we can chat some as a group.
And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing our PowerPoint screen so we can see each other.
Guys.
Hey, Michael.
I'll just jump in here. I've been actually contacted by a number of the venues in town to research the choke points in a number of their venues. And by that, I mean the areas where if an audience was coming into the theater, they could actually be exposed to COVID-19, where social distancing isn't something that's maintained. I've actually come into possession of a large radio frequency ID array, several antennas and whatnot, and working with a company that at one point was putting RFID chips in poker chips and a bunch of other different items to track them throughout the casino. I would actually like to write a paper on this. It's something that could go out to a bunch of different venues, just collecting the research and looking for those areas within a theater, within a lobby where people maybe congregate and get too close. It's kind of the world we're in right now. So that's my crazy idea.
I think that's a great idea, Michael. I mean, there's a lot that's been written around kind of along queuing theory, even from industrial engineering, that might be beneficial in the literature to have a sense for what are some ways of thinking of about that particular problem and how you might measure it and the data that you might collect. So I think that's a great idea.
There's also some interesting data in healthcare management related to using RFID chips for tracking critical care devices within healthcare places, right? Hospitals and whatnot. So there's some data about that already.
Look into that more.
Dan, go ahead.
Another similar thing from what Michael's talking about, and that is tracking cell phones throughout that, because the chips are nice. Some people may grab them, some people may not. Some people may leave them in the bathroom or at water fountains or wherever. But a cell phone, most people will have a cell phone on them. And if you can track that, then you can track proximity as well.
Absolutely.
Another way to skin that cat.
Thanks, Dan. That's great.
That's a great idea. And in fact, at Purdue, we're actually using cell phone data to understand COVID circles, right? People who gather.
What are the rest of you thinking about? And maybe you're not, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, no pressure.
I'm just coming back from, and this is something, and I don't know, just throw it out there, but locking motors, syncing motors, and large arrays of motors together. So you can have a bunch of smaller motors doing the work of larger motors, and locking those together and dealing with lag times between the various encoders between them. So that might be something to research and look into.
I'll tell you, it's funny. It comes up every time I teach my machine design class. Students want to use in their sort of theoretical designs, less expensive but smaller motors and sync them up. And we talk at length about how that's a real challenge. So you're right. That's a huge opportunity. Are there people working on that you know of, or companies exploring that?
SEW is actually working on that, and I'm actually working on sorry I'm late. Was on a job site where we had 2 motors picking up about 10K, and we're having lag time errors.
Sure. Yeah.
Between the two hoists.
Sure. Absolutely. That'd be great. That'd be exciting to hear about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I actually have to run to another meeting here in a minute, but it's about, I'm currently trying to put together a group on campus between the technical theater program, the art program, and the music program to kind of work out technology and it's how to interact it with those disciplines. Is that the sort of thing that this conference would be interesting to hear about? Excellent. And then with the goal of reaching out to our engineering school and our, we have a technological studies program as well, trying to pull them into to broaden the awareness of the engineering applications in the theater and the entertainment realm.
Yep. That would
So-
be great. And that's right in the wheelhouse. But I
Perfect.
say right in the wheelhouse, you know, we're here to create the wheelhouse. So we have really no preconceived ideas or notions. We just like good creative ideas for ways of building the community in scholarly work.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much. Like I said, I apologize. I have to run to another meeting, but I
No
look forward to
problem.
the
Thanks,
next one
Brian.
of these.
Thanks. So I see, so season planning. So someone has commented that they are, yeah, Lindsay. She's looking at presenting the planning of the season for the year and the intersection of the pandemic. Absolutely. I think, you know, anything that can be learned from the unique cases that everyone's experiencing this year, it would be a great way to archive and artifact those key learnings, Lindsay. Of course, we don't know how it ends since we're all in the middle of it. That makes it more exciting, right?
I apologize. I had to step away. Working at home means that happens often. Were we just talking about Lindsay's comment in the chat?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that there are a lot of people who are struggling with that. And there are a lot of folks who, if nothing else, will want to hear the stories about how that, right? That's a great design case format. How did we design our season in this weird time?
If others of you had some hopes for this first Friday, feel free to even just share what your hope or your objective was from attending, even if it has nothing to do with submitting an abstract. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that and what attracted you to the event.
You know, one thing I've been thinking about that I feel like this group could really present, or at least I would love to see examples of, is really interdisciplinary learning or situations where you have different groups of students from different disciplines that are actually working together. And examples of that where that is successful and there's specific learning outcomes to that. Because I think as I am at IUPUI, more and more often I realize that we have students working in silos in our disciplines. And, you know, as I know from talking with Rich and also with you, Mary, that, you know, the trying to get faculty to understand the value and having their students work with other disciplines is difficult. And so then therefore the students themselves don't have those opportunities. But, you know, even last spring, I had students working with 2 other programs on campus developing a themed experience for the NCAA, and just it was a learning experience unlike anything that they would have anywhere else. We had to go outside of the curriculum. It was a co-curricular activity, but I would love to see examples of that at some point.
I think that'd be great. Dan, go ahead.
I'd like to pile on for that for the guy who works in corporate world. You know, the more collaborative the people who come and work for me are, and the broader range of discipline that they have, the better they are for me, and really the more outside the box, because their Swiss Army knife has so many more blades in it, because they have been exposed to those other areas, and they become very efficient with that. And they also become consensus builders, as opposed to needing to be the center core of everything that you get with the silo. So that's something to keep in mind as you do move forward with that. That is huge, to be able to work collaboratively with other people.
That's a really great perspective, Dan. And as Christian was talking, I very much want to see educators share their experiences with that. But I was thinking that a panel of industry folks talking about the importance of that could also be really, really fascinating, right? Particularly for faculty who are struggling with whether the challenges of making those kinds of opportunities happen are worth fighting through, right? I don't know how the rest of you who are in education have experienced this, but I know Mary and I could talk forever about how it seemingly there's yet one more institutional obstacle that we have to walk through to try to truly make interdisciplinary work happen. And so it's always reassuring when we hear from folks like Dan say, no, really, this is important, keep doing it. And I don't know if anybody saw it, but Lindsay has a great comment in the chat about this kind of work that also could be really fundamental in a presentation of some kind, how vocabulary is a big challenge in interdisciplinary work. We just talked about that earlier, even in this session, about how vocabulary and how we think about disseminating scholarly work becomes a barrier to collaboration across disciplines. And so if anybody has anything to say about that, that would be a fantastic conversation and a presentation.
Absolutely, both.
Go
Sorry,
ahead,
Rich.
Mary.
Both on panels and works on that would be great. You know,
Yeah.
even if it's just a poster to say, I don't know if this is the be all end all, but here's what I'm doing as a way to kind of expose and test what it is you are doing and share that with folks and hopefully get support, right?
Yeah. I was going to pick on Mitch because he turned his camera on. I don't know if that meant he was going to talk or not, but I feel okay picking on him because we're colleagues and friends, and he's now new to Indiana at University of Evansville.
Yeah, right. Way south Indiana.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think all this stuff is interesting to me, and you know, on the idea of vocabulary, I'm working across campus to try to get, you know, engineering involved here, and what I've started to do is kind of look at like vocabulary and try to compare them. And an interesting thing would be an actual, you know, visual representation, since we're visual artists, of, oh, this is what you're talking about and this is what I'm talking about. Like how, you know, scenery carpentry is like construction management is like all these other things. And I think that would go to what I always call demystifying of that interdisciplinary work. So that's really interesting to me for sure.
I think that is a fantastic idea, and easily a poster, especially when you're talking about visual work, but also would be a great presentation and potential paper. Ro has added some stuff to the chat. I'm not going to make anybody talk out loud if they don't want to, but these are some really interesting ideas, sort of interrogating the standardization of vocabulary, that sort of thing. So if you want to talk more about that, Ro, we'd love to hear it. Otherwise, again, I'm not going to make anybody talk, other than Mitch. I'm not going to make anybody talk who doesn't want to.
Sorry about that, folks. I'm sort of doing double duty on Zoom. But yeah, there's, I mean, it's something that we struggle with in theater, even as we go between sort of different regions or different countries. And I wonder if there's, you know, we're working really hard to standardize that form, but I can imagine that only sort of compounds upon itself when you're working interdisciplinarily. So I wonder if there's a sort of a standard writing organization that we could talk to, or whatever, you know, to sort of get the ball rolling on that. Because when we start to do that work, I can imagine that's going to be definitely cause a lot of friction. Sure, absolutely. And you know, one real example of that is work that happens in the US versus work that happens in Europe, right? And the sort of technical standards that have to be matched across the pond. I wonder, the acronym is escaping me now. Oh, ESTA, which is embarrassing because I'm a member. I should know the acronym, but I would bet that ESTA would have some folks that we could bring in for a panel on that, just sort of talking about standardizing language. Though I would be remiss if we didn't point out Lindsay's very real point that having a standard language maybe sometimes isn't the best solution, right? Because having a standard language or a standard set of vocabulary it can be a shortcut to true collaborative communication and understanding. I think that's the point. I don't want to speak for you, Lindsay, but that's the point you're trying to make. Yeah.
And so there's the flip side of that, making sure that we're training folks to have those conversations and learn how to have those conversations and to say, well, is this what you mean?
And in fact, even the work that Rich and I do together, we often come at it with our own language, and we create a new language in between us, which is kind of the muddy middle. And actually, that's where the fun stuff happens, because then you find out how much you have in common. But it's messy in the middle, and it's not always easy. And when you start thinking about in the classroom with students who are sometimes driven by a grade, that messy middle looks risky. And so how do you lower those risks for them, so that they are willing to go out on a limb and be in that messy middle space that's not well defined? Any work in that area would be awesome.
Relationships are messy, as Lindsay said. Absolutely. And learning to be comfortable with that is an important part of the work that we do with our students, certainly. I'm watching the time, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I know that there's at least one student here. And if there are more, I would certainly be curious if students are thinking about things that they might want to share or present. We'd love to hear from you as well.
Is this me being called out?
No, I'm not making anybody talk. There's no
No.
grade on the line for you, Lee, on this, I promise.
Well, I'm a student at Purdue University. I'm about to graduate in December. And me and Professor P had briefly talked about a couple years ago doing something for our program with the idea of the 4-year capstone and kind of using all 4 years to build up to our senior project. And that's something that's still been on my brain. So.
Sure.
I know we also have some folks from virtual reality space. If you have any thoughts on how you see the work that you guys are doing, you're crossing all sorts of disciplines. Sometimes people think about virtual reality and they stop at gaming. But if you want to talk about some of your work, that would be great.
Hi there. Sure, this is George Takahashi from the Envision Center. Sorry if you can hear my dog whining in the background. One of the other downsides of working from home.
Sure.
So yes, this is one of the things that I think we talk about a lot with inside of our group, where we start taking our technologies and things that we're very accustomed to into industries that aren't as familiar with the technology. So if we take, if we start talking about, training and simulation to somebody from like the pharmacy department who aren't as familiar with doing these kind of like virtual reality sort of immersive experiences, and try to get them accustomed to this kind of, new world or new entire dimension of experiencing learning materials, we have to sort of adapt how we onboard them into this process. So when we talk about, language, we frequently have to use analogies and other types of things that they can more easily relate to. And this is extremely visible when we are presenting our materials to, an older demographic that might not be as familiar with the materials just because they weren't exposed as children. So this is some of the conversations that we're even having internally on, how do we expose this, this like advanced technology to somebody else that is interested and wants to leverage these new things, but how do we introduce them in a beneficial manner, especially from a learning perspective?
And I think that has some amazing threads, George, even in workforce development, right? Where you're trying to help upskill folks with all of the rampant new technologies that are coming on board. And you see it maybe as an opportunity to expand your offering or find new customer base. And how do you help upskill your team that may be, a little behind in those areas?
Yeah, that's great. So we are close to quarter of, and it's probably a time for us to start to wrap up with the last part of this presentation. I don't know why that was so hard for me to say. I apologize. But to sort of sum up some of what I was scribbling some notes on and some of what I heard, Michael, you were talking about this potential research work on COVID-19 tracking, people tracking inside a venue, which I think would be a great presentation. We'd love to hear that. Dan and Christian were both talking about the importance of interdisciplinary and interdisciplinary work. One from what our industry partners see as why that's important, which I think we may follow up with you, Dan, and see if we want to put together a panel about that with some of your colleagues from across the industry. I don't know, Christian, if you have a particular project that you think is a great example or a case study or a design case to talk about, or if we should just put that out as a possibility for people to think about. But I would encourage you, if you've got one, people would love to hear it as much as you would love to hear it. So that would be great. Laura had mentioned something about the challenges of developing a season in the season of COVID. And I think that also would be a fantastic potential presentation. So again, I would encourage you
Lindsay?
to, yeah, Lindsay, I would encourage you to, did I misspeak your name? I apologize. Shoot, I try not to do that. I wrote Laura, but I meant to write Lindsay. My apologies. But that would be a great presentation or even a paper that I think people could definitely benefit from. There's so much learning for us to have about how to deal with a pandemic that we're all in the middle of figuring out right now, and priceless learning, I think. Mitch and Ro both talked about the importance of language and transference of language and vocabulary between disciplines. And I think, again, if you want to work on those separately, awesome. If you could meet each other and work on them together, there's some interesting overlaps there. I would just encourage you to be open to that. Lee mentioned something about the 3-year capstone experience at Purdue, which I'm biased, but think would be a great presentation, of course. And I was writing notes when George was talking about the VR group here on campus. So Mary, if you could sum up what he talked about, that would be great.
Yeah, it was really, trying to help others understand advanced technology and in using things like analogy and language to improve adaptation, especially when you're transferring the technology out of a domain space into a totally new domain space like training. So that was hugely valuable.
Yes, absolutely. And so there are some design case kinds of things here that we've talked about, right? And there are some more sort of engineering research kinds of things, right? Like Michael, yours could lend itself to sort of more traditional engineering research study kind of proposal. So I would encourage you all to follow up on those. Those are really exciting ideas. This alone could be a really fun symposium day, just the stuff you all have talked about, and really informative for folks. So these are all great proposals. And as you're working on them, we are here to help. So Mary, should I bring up the PowerPoint and we'll work through the rest of this here?
Yeah, why don't we? And that way we can take some final questions at the end.
Sure.
So next slide, Rich. So just bringing us back to what you need. If you are interested in submitting, we're going to give you a timeline. We're going to talk through the submission steps. And then, of course, we're looking for high quality scholarly submissions because they are peer reviewed. And so it's not just me and Rich saying, hey, that's a great idea. It actually gets a broader review. So we encourage you to move forward with that. Next slide, Rich. One space that we encourage you to go deep on and to really think about, really after the abstract, but as you're building your abstract, is the methods section. If there's an opportunity to grow in strength from scholarly work, it's probably going deep on the methods section. And so what we've provided here are some references for you that might be helpful. Whether you're designing an experiment or you're trying to share a best practice, we've provided some links here for you. If you decide to come at this from the engineering standpoint, understanding what's the theoretical framework that you're building your work off of. And so we provided a link on that. And then for those of you who might need some help doing a thorough literature review, I know I grew up in the old form where you still use the library, which no one does that anymore. So how do you use the benefits of all the databases to really get a thorough literature review? And frankly, an amazing literature review in all, you know, in any one of the areas that you've talked about would be a great addition to a possible proposal. And then, of course, as Rich mentioned earlier, we've got some specific examples to going deeper and understanding how do you build a case study or an experimental design. So we hope those resources are valuable tools to you going forward. Next slide. What I provided here as another tool is a link to prior works that presented in our 2019 symposium. You know, often it's helpful to kind of see how someone else structured their work for a brand new symposium. We've run only a couple years now. So we encourage you to go out to that link at the Purdue libraries where we archive all these works and, you know, just take a look at what was submitted. One of the benefits of our symposium is that works that are located in EPUBs, which is our archiving tool, they provide detailed metrics on who's looking at your work. So while we don't try and mess with your copywriting, we do want to help you get a wide audience of readership. And so you can see from this example that one of our presenters from 2019 has already had 138 downloads and many, many views. And that can be really impactful depending on the type of work that you're trying to do. So we encourage you to take a look at that. We also have provided an abstract template if that helps you, just to get you started so you're not having to open up a blank Word document and build it from scratch. So if it's helpful, we want to provide it to you, and that's out on our Fusion Studio Center website. Next slide, Rich. If you do decide that you want to participate, the abstract submission deadline has been set at December 14th. We thought that might be a handy extension from some of our prior years where we were looking at Thanksgiving, because many of us have a compressed schedule for lots of reasons. And it's super easy to set up an account. It's not a lot of steps. You just create, you know, a login and a password, and then you just follow the link for authors and submit events, and it'll take you right to the next page, which actually looks like slide 16, where you enter the paper title, your presenter information, and you drop in your abstract and you're done. So you don't have to email Rich and I, you don't have to tell us that you're submitting. You can do it sneakily, and that's totally okay. We look forward to seeing all of the submissions. And in fact, we'll be sending out information to people if you don't want to submit, but maybe you'd like to be a reviewer. We're always looking for reviewers as well. So thank you in advance for considering that.
And don't be confused. The EPUBs framework asks you to enter the title of event. If you see that on the screen there, right underneath where it says paper title, that is indeed where you enter the paper title, not the event symposium on education, entertainment, engineering. It's a weird artifact of the way their framework is set up. That is where you enter the paper title, not an event title.
Not an event title. And don't forget to click submit. Next slide. Rich.
Just a quick update or overview of some of our deadlines coming up here. December 14th, as Mary said, is the final date for abstract submission. By mid-January, on January 18th, we intend to give you notification of whether your abstract has been accepted or rejected. We will ask you to submit then, if you've been accepted, on March 30th or by March 30th, an initial draft of your paper/presentation/poster. And we ask for that to be as complete as possible. And we will provide feedback and provide some editing help to help guide your work to a really sort of rock solid, knock it out of the park presentation/paper. We'll get feedback back to you by May 3rd. And that won't just be Mary and I, that will be the group of reviewers that we pull together for the symposium. So that by June 28th, you can get to us the finalized versions of your work so that we could have them ready to print in the symposium booklet and to be available for distribution at the symposium itself. I think that's it, Mary. I think we've made it to the end. So thank you all. Go ahead, Mary. You are muted, my friend.
Not again. Why do
It
I do that
happens.
to myself? Yeah. So it's been a fast hour. We're really happy that you joined us for our first Friday. We'll never have another first Friday again. So thank you for joining us. Are there any questions or final comments or maybe even suggestions going forward?
Dan.
Is there a sort of
You
contact?
first, then Dan. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Is there a sort of contact list for all the rest of the attendees for this program? Would it be beneficial to make one so that we can sort of, if we do decide that we want to sort of work together on these proposals, that we can get in touch with each other?
I think we'll have to look into that. We have not asked permission from folks who've shared their email to allow us to share it with other folks, but we can certainly ask if folks are willing to do that, and then we can start to distribute that information. Absolutely. We try to be really mindful of protecting folks' privacy and their information in that way. So, but we hadn't considered that. So Mary and I will talk about it and see what we can make happen there. That's a great suggestion.
You may get a note asking for permission.
Yes. Dan, you had your hand up.
Yes, and I'm assuming you're going to make those slides available to the participants here. Perfect.
Absolutely. We'll make sure you get a link to where these are on the Fusion Studio website.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you all, everybody. Everybody's time is precious, so we're not going to make you stare at each other for longer than you need to. Thank you so much for attending. Mary, do you have any final thoughts?
Nope, we just look forward to sharing in the next few weeks what the next First Friday will be on, and we encourage, if you can make it, make it. It's a fun lunch hour just to help build the community. So thanks again for spending time with us. We know you have a lot of competing interests.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.